So, Devin, so thank you first and foremost for accepting this interview. And I would like to thank you for this opportunity for the whole community in my university first of all. And I started thinking, how can I introduce you, because it's not such an easy task to do. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind to everybody is your involvement in the creation of the internet, particularly with the whole TCP/IP protocol. But then I thought, well, I have here some questions that might help me instead of me doing the whole presentation. Let you do this by answering some questions. So the whole situation here is we invited young students from my university, that's the Universidad Nacional de Rosario in Argentina, to ask questions for you. And I'm really happy because there are some amazing questions among them. And for the first question, I think we can have a little bit more insight about who you are, because it states, what is your role in society? So what do you have to say?
That's a very broad and interesting question, I suppose. Look, I'm an engineer by preference. My training is in computer science, and I have a PhD in that topic, but I'm really an engineer. I like to build things that people use. So if my role in society, I think, is severalfold. It is to build things that people can use, and to be aware of the potential hazards of technology. And it's easy for us to see now, although not so easy 50 years ago, that this platform called the internet and the World Wide Web that sits on top of it can be abused and be used in harmful ways. And so our society now needs to do something to manage the harmful behaviors while enhancing the utility of this basic infrastructure. And so, although I don't have the responsibility for enforcing any of the guardrails that I think we would all like, at the very least, I can do what I can to articulate what those problems are, make recommendations to people who make policy and laws in order to make this system safer to use. And of course, I still want everyone in the world to have access to the internet, and right now I'm only half done.
So this ties up directly to the next question, because you say you have a special focus on hazards and dangers that arise from the use of the internet. Did you see those dangers coming back in the day when you started working on this? So I know this was kind of a process, the whole construction and development of the internet, but was there a moment when you said, well, this might be a problem, this might be very good, perhaps some positive surprises?
Well, not really. I mean, the first thing that your student should understand is that when this network was being developed, the community that was putting it together was relatively uniform, in the sense that they were all technologists, they were all computer scientists, they were largely academics. They were trying to figure out how to make it work at all. The context in which it was being built was a platform for the military to use for command and control. And of course, we understood that security was a big issue. Some people will say, well, if you understood that, why isn't it more secure now than it is? And of course, part of the answer to that is that the technologies that were available in the 1970s, when this system was being designed, were available, but some of the details were classified, which meant that I wasn't in a position to share all of this security criteria with many of the people who were actually working on refining the system. So I had an appreciation for the need for security and even ideas for implementing it. And even in the late 1970s, when public key cryptography became available, I understood how to retrofit that, which we have done into the system. But I didn't think that it was worth interfering with our enhanced experience of using the network. I want you to think for just a minute about the discipline that's required to use public key cryptography. Not every graduate student that was working on this would exercise that discipline. Now, having said that, I always must point out that the HTTPS, the Hypertext Transport Protocol, in secure mode is all automatic. You don't have to go and set up a certificate and do all this other stuff. Because it's below the level of user visibility. But the more active things like digital signatures, for example, or actively encrypting email and things like that require real discipline. So I felt comfortable postponing the implementation of some of those security measures while the system was evolving in the civilian sector. And almost until I would say the 2000s, we weren't seeing major abuses, except possibly for malware, which we knew about and were trying to build defenses against. So anyway, that's a long way of answering that in the early days, I don't think it was obvious what kinds of harmful behaviors would emerge. Now, of course, we've got social networking and malware and ransomware and all these other things, and we do have to do something about that.
And to a more lighthearted answer, something, I mean, the internet has already also given place to many beautiful and social and interactive and possibilities, and I don't know, I would like to know if there is something where you were positively surprised about the internet, where you said, well, that's very nice, I like that.
Well, first of all, I think that it's evident that the internet has made a great deal of difference in the world. And when you think about all the businesses that rely on the internet and have grown up around it, when you think of all the research that gets done, even in the pandemic, the sharing of genetic information about the virus accelerated our ability to produce the vaccines. And of course, the internet is used all the time for online entertainment. It's being used for business. It's being used for research. It's being used for education. There is just a massive mountain of value which has emerged from people's use of this infrastructure. And that's why I'm still determined to implement the motto at the Internet Society, which is Internet is for everyone. I want everyone to have the option of getting access to it and using it and contributing to it. But I also feel I have to temper that enthusiasm with the recognition that we need to build some guardrails and to improve the safety and security and privacy of the system.
And where would you think are the greater issues in this task of making the internet available for everyone? Because the first thing that I think of is places where there is no electricity, where there is even less internet. So, but what are the main issues you encountered in this task?
So your point about electricity is well taken. The internet doesn't work without electricity because it's based on computers and communication technology. On the other hand, you'd be surprised what batteries will let you do. You think about the number of people who have mobiles that have to be recharged. And some of the recharging mechanisms are pretty amazing, including people on bicycles, generating electricity. So batteries help where electricity is regularly available. There are also other gaps. I mean, even when you overcome this problem of available electrical power, you may still not have infrastructure that's needed in order to implement the internet. But even those gaps are being closed now in several ways. The most two dramatic ways are the undersea cables, which have proliferated, to my surprise, even to the point of connecting islands in the Pacific and the Atlantic. In addition to that, of course, satellite systems are going up, the most visible of which, in the literal sense of the word, is Starlink coming from SpaceX. But there are additional low Earth orbiting satellite projects that are also underway. And those, if they come to fruition, will provide access to the internet from every square inch of the Earth's surface, including the middle of the oceans. So in some ways, the gap for access is closing, but there are some additional gaps, one of which is cost. You know, how expensive is it? Can you afford the equipment? Can you afford the services to get access to and use the internet? And the answer in many cases may turn out to be no. So we still have other gaps to close. But at least as a technologist, it feels to me as if we are rapidly approaching the point where access to internet will be feasible to everyone on the planet, certainly within the end of the decade.
Wonderful. And connecting to this earlier statement where you mentioned the key role of the internet during the pandemic, I have another question in this direction, because in particular the internet was particularly internet for universities and schools, because otherwise we wouldn't have any lectures, we wouldn't have any teaching at all. However, at the same time, many people have been complaining about how difficult it is to make education feasible in these times of a pandemic. So my question in this direction would be, what can education learn from the internet? Is there something that you might share with us that you say this is something that education should learn with the internet?
So first of all, at the university level, the internet can provide almost the same experience that you get in university lectures, because you have lecturers who are speaking to the students are taking notes, who go home and do homework. We can even do online kinds of homework together. So at the university level, I think that this has worked reasonably well as a facsimile of what you've normally experienced in person, with the exception of laboratories, of course, where you really need physical access to things. As you work your way down towards K through 12 in the high schools, secondary schools, and so on, it gets worse. And part of the reason for that is that the facilities in elementary schools, secondary schools, are not nearly as well equipped as the universities tend to be for access to internet. Moreover, the teachers are much more accustomed to very close interactions with younger people in the context of education, and the tools that are available for teaching online, I think, are still relatively weak. So what happened, of course, during the pandemic is we were suddenly forced to go into this remote mode of operation. I mean, what would have taken perhaps 10 years to get to was compressed in a year or less. And the results, of course, are exactly as you'd expect. They're not very good. So we have a lot to learn about using online facilities for teaching and learning. But let me show a slightly different variation on learning that we're seeing now with YouTube. What happens is that when people are trying to figure out how to do a particular thing, they often will go to YouTube and say, how do I do X? And the next thing you know is you got a half a dozen videos that show you and explain to you how to do something. That's what I call just-in-time learning. Now, I'm not trying to equate that with the kind of regular coursework that you take with mathematics and history and biology and so on. But this idea that there is information out there that's readily accessible, if you can find it, that helps you learn something you need right this moment, is remarkably reinforcing, because you know why you needed to know that information, because you needed it to do something, to solve a problem or to complete a task. And you don't often get that feedback when you're in a regular education program and you're learning how to do multiplication or division or calculus, and you're thinking, why do I need this? And so this other mode of learning, which is discovery at need, is a very powerful mean. And I think that we may see more and more of that happening in addition to our more conventional, traditional ways of learning. So in the long run, for those of us who might look forward to children born today, for example, may live to 100, they're going to have to keep learning all during their lifetimes because technology and demands on their knowledge will change over time. And they will have to learn new things to be relevant. And they will probably have to use techniques like the YouTube idea in order to learn things they need, because they can't just drop everything and go back to school.
Yeah, so I kept thinking about what you said, and so I have to admit, I myself use YouTube very much for that precise reason, because I need something done and I don't know how to do it. However, that would be just like when you have a carrot right in front of your nose and you want to grab it. Is that useful when you, for instance, when you're talking about school or even the university? So there is a carrot, but it's so far away that I don't see if it can be used for that kind of knowledge.
Oh, good. All right. So let's have a fight over this, because there's a school called Montessori, and in the Montessori theory, you learn by doing, which I believe is a really powerful way of learning things.
Sure.
So to the extent that you pose problems to students and they will learn from solving the problems, then I think this method, it actually has a great deal of power. I'm not trying to argue that the more formal introduction to concepts, as opposed to discovering them by trying to do something, is weak or anything. I think you do have to have some fundamentals. But the only way that you really internalize those fundamentals is by using them. And certainly, I remember this well when I was learning calculus as a high school student. The only way I really understood calculus was to solve problems using the concepts.
Yes, for sure. However, I was not contradicting you. I was just thinking. So maybe what you're saying is that a combination of both approaches would be the best, which I think I could agree on that.
Well, I mean, some people will say, are books no longer relevant? And the answer is they are still very relevant, because they organize a body of knowledge, and the author of the book is trying to present information to you in an order in which the author believes it will be readily assimilated. And so the organizing of material that you need to learn is very important, and books have a way of doing that. But this reinforcement by working problems is an additional and very powerful learning tool.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much. For the next question, I think we can dive deeper into a more general perspective of computer science. So the idea is the following. So we have computer scientists who are addressing different topics that were usually the field of philosophy. For instance, what consciousness is, what is intelligence, what is perception, how do we use perception? These are all questions that are classical philosophical questions, and now we have computer scientists who are working on these very matters. So the question would be, is computer science taking over philosophy? Is there no need more for philosophy?
Oh, absolutely not. Computer science is a very weak tool relative to the philosophical questions that you were asking. We don't know what intelligence is. We don't understand how our brains work. We don't understand how it can be that a 3-year-old child can learn from just 2 or 3 examples of something and then formulate a model in their brains of what's going on, can abstract and generalize from a small number of experiences. Compare that to a machine learning deep neural network, which has to be trained with millions and even billions of examples that are run over and over and over again in order to adjust a whole bunch of parameters in order to get it to behave in some way that's similar to what a human being can do. So we are far, far away in the computer science world from understanding or even emulating what the human brain can do, to say nothing of the fact that the human brain which operates with neurons that are very slow, uses very, very little power compared to the super fast things we do with supercomputers that, drain our energy production capability and produce rather weak results relative to what a human brain can do. Now, on the other side, we have found that computing can do things quickly that humans can't. Dealing with large masses of information, for example, or doing a computation that would take a human being, millions of years to do by hand. So computers have power, and they can help us. They enhance our ability to do computations. Something that your students should be very conscious of is the phrase computational X for some value of X. Computational biology, computational physics, computational linguistics, computational humanities. We are taking computers and we are using them as powerful tools to understand things deeper than we can otherwise. And so here I would say we do see the real power of computing as a tool. Here's an example. I speak English reasonably well. I grew up with that. Ich spreche ein wenig Deutsch. Ich говорю медленно и плохо по-русски. Je ne parle pas français. I don't really have a command of many languages, and I have computers to help me do that. It's a deficiency that it recovers thanks to Google Translate. These are powerful tools if we use them well. So I don't think that philosophy is gone. I think that computer science is trying to understand how humans think in order to figure out how to redesign the way computation works. I absolutely guarantee you that computer vision is nothing like what humans experience. Because when we look at something, we build models of what we see. We do abstractions of what we see, and computers are very weak at that.
So I have to know that you haven't mentioned the term computational philosophy.
Yeah.
Because I just think that, well, computer scientists, like many other branches, they take inspiration from other branches. Just like when you're talking about what what consciousness is for an AI, we use the inspiration of what our brain does. We may not reach the same depth, but we take inspiration from nature. Wouldn't it be, or do you know somewhere where it is already happening that it's the other way around, that for instance philosophy is using insights from computer science?
Well, that's a really interesting question. If you had said humanities, I would have nodded my head quickly, because I see computers being used for analysis of text, for example. In fact, I'll be lecturing on that topic in a few weeks' time. On the philosophical side, I'm a little less clear, because when we ask, what is intelligence, what is consciousness, for example, I think we struggle with the weak facsimile that computers offer. I'm sure you're aware of the notion of attention, and it has some relationship to consciousness. It's hard to be attentive if you're unconscious, for example. The question is there any analog of that in the computer world? And the answer is, well, sort of. But I think we don't have a deep enough understanding of what consciousness is in order to map that into what we are capable of doing with computers. So even though it's a fun phrase, computational philosophy, I think that's almost worth a seminar to ask, does it exist? And if it does, what is it?
Well, there we have a bit of job to be done, I think. Well, amazing. Thank you for this insightful answer. But now, if we talk about the future, so I know you have a very clear knowledge of what the current status of computer science is in many branches. I don't say everything, but in many. And what are the technical advances that you are expecting, looking forward to, or that you think is needed in the near future? I don't. It's like in the next 50,
Well,
100 years.
we can, well, and we're not very good at predicting anything 100 years hence. All we have to do is go back 100 years and ask what was the norm for computing. And the answer was, well, it didn't exist yet, or barely. So look, here are the things that are coming soon. First of all, quantum computing is quite real. It's not scaled, hasn't scaled to the point where it's useful, but we're pursuing this at Google and elsewhere. And so I believe that will produce some very interesting results. It's the computational capability of quantum machines, in theory anyway, is quite powerful. So that's one thing. Doing optimizations in near real time on large scale problems could be super valuable. So that's one thing. Second, we're seeing some specialized computing devices, tensor processing units at Google that do machine learning, and we're in our 5th generation now of those things. Third, we're starting to see possibilities of exploiting optical computing, which has been a sort of receding in the distance over time. I've just seen some laboratory results that in which an optical processing system runs about 1,000 times faster than what we typically get with electronics. Now, that would be an exciting outcome if you could productize it. So we have some real potential in the computing space to improve our ability to do computation. The other things in the near future that I anticipate have to do with communications capability. We've touched a little bit on that with low Earth orbiting satellites, now with 5G and 6G wireless communication. All of that will simply implies a richer communication environment. The third thing, which I think is very predictable, is an increasingly large number of devices that have computational capability. Sometimes this is called the Internet of Things, and having appliances all around the house and the office and the manufacturing plants that are programmable simultaneously adds enormous amounts of flexibility into these devices, but it also increases fragility and brittleness and hazards, potential security weaknesses and things like that. So we have a complicated future ahead of us as these technologies unfold. And that means that people in computer science have a big responsibility to pay attention to making things safe, secure, stable, and reliable, so that when people are depending on them, that they in fact can depend with confidence.
Very nice. Thank you very much. And for the last question for today, this is a bit something that I have to say I experienced myself. So when I was a student, the people, like for instance you and other laureates and field medalists, were something that were very, very far away from my reality, and it was something that I couldn't know what to expect, how these people are, why they are that, what got them into the position they are now in. And so the question would be first, and this of course might seem a bit silly, but do you consider yourself a genius? And or are you just good at what you do?
No, absolutely not. And you know, just to give you a sense for how a lot of us who've been honored feel, I was in Lindau at the annual Nobel Prize meeting, and a student asked one of the Nobel Prize physicists, you know, did you know that you were going to get the Nobel Prize when you were doing the work? And he said, listen, getting the Nobel Prize is 95% luck and 5% knowing how to do the math. So, and I think a lot of us feel exactly that way. I was just very fortunate to have been invited to try to work on and solve a particular problem. And the solution the internet turned out to be implementable, beneficial, and of interest to the commercial sector, which allowed it to spread dramatically. So no, I'm just very lucky that I got to work on this problem relatively early in my career. Often these big successes are a consequence of accidentally getting to work on something that you know how to do. And so for me, I consider this just a fortuitous circumstance. It doesn't have anything to do with whether I'm very smart or not.
Well, you said that you were lucky, but because you were somehow in a situation where you could do something important. But where did you take the self-confidence to do that? Because one thing is to know and to have the luck to be in such a position, and then you have to go through that. So, what advice could you give a young student?
Let me just say that the most important lesson I can leave your students with is that if you're going to do anything big, the first thing you need to do is get some help, especially from people who are smarter than you are. Second, it may take a long time, and so you better have patience and persistence. Don't give up. Sometimes things will fail, and that's okay. You should learn from the failures, and and ask yourself, okay, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? How do I make it work? So this is just a matter of hard work more than anything else. What's his name? Edison was known to have said that most invention is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. And he's right about that. It takes a lot of work, and you'd better be prepared to put work in for long periods of time to do anything big.
Wonderful. Well, then I would like to thank you for this interview. I enjoyed it very much, and I hope that our students enjoy it. Thank you very much to the young students who brought some interesting questions for this interview. And of course, thank you to the EHLF for making this interview possible as well. So again, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed the chat, and I hope your students will as well. So I'm sorry we can't see each other face to face in person, but we'll see each other on the net.
Of course we will, and soon enough. And perhaps next year in the HLF we might see. We never know.
I hope so. I hope so.
Until then, take care. Bye bye.